Now, folks, let's have a look at a question on study drama. It's from the 2024 exam. It was question 3 and it was worth 20 marks. And I mentioned it in a previous video. You were given these 2 pictures of productions of Timon of Athens, one of which, this one here, the characters were dressed in kind of Elizabethan costumes, so the costumes that you might have seen on stage if you were there when the play was originally staged. And even though it's set in Athens, so even then slightly different. Anyway, don't go off that. And then you have the production of this play where it's set in kind of the modern world and the characters are dressed in modern clothing. So the question was asking, if you were directing a Shakespearean play, so again, directing, so you have to use your imagination. Sorry. Would you use traditional clothes as picture A or modern clothes for the actors' costumes? And it asks for 2 reasons for your answer. Now, what's really interesting here, and this is where there's no kind of 100% correct approach. This question is divided into an A and a B section. Now, it doesn't tell you how many marks are for A and how many marks for B. The exam does not indicate the proportion of marks allocated to part A and part B. But it does specifically state in part A that they want you to make 2 points. See, it says it there? 2 reasons. So that would suggest that you definitely need 2 paragraphs if you're writing, if you're given 2 reasons, because separate point equals separate paragraph. So for me, in terms of time management, the top student would have written 2 paragraphs for part A and 2 paragraphs for part B. But here I said, look, let's try and get as many marks as we can. 2 paragraphs in response to part A and 1 paragraph in response to part B, which asks you to write about your studied play. So here's my answer to part A. If you were directing, which would you choose, traditional or modern clothes? This is an interesting question, and I think I would opt for modern costumes. I'll come back and explain everything I'm marking when we read the answer. Shakespeare's work often has a reputation for being old-fashioned, and this might alienate the audience. Sorry. This sense might be reinforced if my actors appeared on stage dressed in Elizabethan costumes. In order to make the audience feel more relaxed and comfortable in the theatre, I would choose contemporary clothing for my characters. I think this would work because Shakespeare is timeless. His plays are 400 years old, and sometimes his language feels antiquated. But there is no doubt that he addresses universal themes that lend the play a timeless quality. He writes about love, about conflict, and about struggle. All of these themes are as relevant today as they were when the plays were written. Dressing the characters in modern clothing might help convey that message to my audience. Now, that's an unusual approach because I don't specifically talk about a play in the answer. The question doesn't require me to. The question requires me to talk about whether or not I would choose traditional or modern clothes. So I go, and I said, I'm not getting into talking about a particular play. It doesn't ask me to, but I've got 2 really good points. Point number 1, I don't want to alienate my audience. Point number 2, it would show the timeless quality of Shakespeare's play. And not only do I make those 2 distinct points, but the vocabulary use here is at distinction level. Alienate, Elizabethan, contemporary, universal themes, antiquated, relevant, convey. This is an example of how an answer can be really high quality based on the ideas and on the expression. Now, your teacher might read that and say, well, no, you need to refer to your play, your study play. But the question doesn't say that. It doesn't tell you, and you're going to see now in a minute, and there's another question which does tell you, and then you do that. It doesn't tell you to do that. It tells you to think about why contemporary or Elizabethan costumes would be, which one would you pick? To think about why you would pick one or the other. And you've done that in a really clear way. And each paragraph has a, you remember, I bet in school your teacher does this, has a clear point which is explained. Now there's no quotation here, but each paragraph has a clear point. Now that's why I much prefer to think about the idea of the Rice rules. Though each one of those paragraphs has a clear and relevant point. Each one of those paragraphs is written in language which is easy to read, clean, no basic errors, clear expression. And each one of those paragraphs, you have an explanation. So I would go for modern costumes because Shakespeare has a reputation for being old-fashioned and could alienate his audience. If I went for contemporary clothing, that would make the audience feel more relaxed and comfortable. Excellent. Second point, Shakespeare is timeless. While his work is 400 years old, he addresses universal themes that are relevant today. If they're wearing modern clothes, that might help convey that to the audience. Excellent. Now, there's no because there's no need for evidence there, no need for quotation, no need for specific reference. It's an ideas question. That was actually the harder of the two parts of the question, and the vast majority of students would have struggled greatly with that question last year. If I was marking that, I would get at least an 8, probably a 9 out of 10 in terms of the structure. We'll talk about the marking scheme for this exam when I finish going through all these example answers. But what I want to do now is look at the second part B. It says, now here it's wanting you to name a character from a Shakespeare play you have studied. So now it's telling me I must talk about a play I've studied, and therefore I'm going to do that. Make one suggestion for this character's costume. It specifically says one suggestion that you think would reflect something important about the character to the audience. Explain your suggestion. If it says one, that's one paragraph. Now you could write 2 and maybe you will get rewarded for writing 2, but you don't need to. Do what you need to do and do that well. So they give you a box, name of your play. So we're going for Merchant, name of the character Shylock. Now what I'm going to do is make a suggestion about Shylock's costume, which is relevant to the question. I'm going to support my point with quotation, which shows I'm informed, I study my play. I'm going to write as clearly as I can, and I'm going to explain my point. You ready? Okay, here we go. If I were directing a production of The Merchant of Venice, I would make sure the actor playing Shylock would wear a very expensive tailored suit. Super topic sentence. No messing about. It says, make a suggestion, and I am directly onto it. Okay. Why would you do that? So that's if you think about the paragraph, that's the first part. That's the idea. Okay? Now, here's the explanation and the information together. This would convey not only, and here's why, this would convey not only Shylock's wealth, but also his sense of himself as a proud and successful man. Now the question is asking how that would reflect something important about the character. And I'm saying it would show that he's a proud and successful man, and he's a wealthy man. This would make his description of his treatment at the hands of Antonio more shocking. So again, you're really explaining your point. And if you're going to say he was treated badly by Antonio, you have to prove it. Shylock describes the abuse in lines like, "You call me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine. And you did void your room upon my beard," which means you spat on me. So I've got a clear point, a very expensive tailored suit. That's the costume. I've got an explanation as to why, I've got evidence taken from the play, and then I've got more explanation. I think dressing Shylock in this way suggests his dignity and his pride, and his success will make these words all the more startling for the audience. So why am I saying all the more startling for the audience? Because the question asked about how this would reflect something important for the audience. Always, always, always trying to remember the question. The audience will get the message. He's a hardworking, dignified man who definitely does not deserve this abuse. Now, I know your teacher will say, oh no, that's 10 marks. You need to write 2 paragraphs. You don't. If I'm marking that, that's what I'm giving it. The harshest marker in the exam might give it an 8. These are the fine margins. If it's an 8, it's a higher merit. If it's a 10, it's a distinction. What have you got? Does this kid know their play? Really well. Have they done their prep? Yeah. But are they aware of the fact that they're not rote learning things? They're able to adapt their knowledge to engage with the specifics of a question 100%. I love it. You write like that, you score well in your junior cycle. I hope you found that in some way useful.